Hello, everybody, and welcome to Friends of the Force, a Star Wars podcast. I'm your host, Brad.
And I'm your host, Sarah.
And we are back with a very special episode this week, continuing our High Republic coverage. It's our first episode here of Phase 2, and we are so excited because we're joined today by author Zoraida Córdova, whose newest book, Star Wars Convergence, hits bookshelves today from Del Rey Publishing. Yes. Oh my gosh. So exciting. Another adult novel out in the world for the High Republic. And like, what an excellent one to begin with.
My excitement about Zoraida being a High Republic author is just through the roof. Truly, I'm so glad that we have this book and that we had the opportunity to chat with her about this book and also just about the High Republic in general. And her writing in general. It's always so exciting to talk with her because I love hearing about her process and just hearing her excitement about her work and also just hyping up her books. So this is a real winner for me.
Yeah, it's been exactly 3 years since we've had Zoraida on the podcast last time. And at that point, Sarah, you were not my like formal official co-host at that point. So it was just me. And I was so happy to have you involved in the discussion this time. And for Zoraida, she has done so much since then. She's been extremely busy. Some of her works in the last couple years include The Inheritance of Orquídea Divina, The Way to Rio Luna, Incendiary and Illusionary, which are a part of her Hollow Crown series. And she's also contributed another short story to From a Certain Point of View, the anthology from Star Wars. This time it was a Boba Fett story, which was narrated by John Hamm in audiobook form, which that's a pretty cool accolade to have to your name. So not only has she been busy, but she's been busy doing some incredibly cool things.
Yes, seriously, all the books. And that's just like a sampling of all the work that she's put out in the past couple of years. And then there's more coming up really soon. I don't know how she does it, but a hero, a real hero.
Yep, she is always on deadline, which makes it even more special that she was able to take some time out and join us on the podcast and of all things to talk the High Republic, finally. So here we are. Without further ado, let's turn it to our interview with author Zoraida Córdova. Happy release day to Star Wars Convergence as part of the High Republic, and we are so excited 3 years later to be once again joined by author Zoraida Córdova. Zoraida, welcome back to the podcast. We are so happy to have you.
Thank you.
So at the time this episode's dropping, Convergence is on bookshelves. How does it feel to have your second Star Wars book out there in the world for people to read? And not only, last time it was a YA book, now it's the adult novel from Del Rey, leading the High Republic, which is like so huge.
I know it is incredibly terrifying and intimidating. I feel like I'm walking behind so many incredible authors. But I'm really excited because I really love Convergence. I had a great time writing it, and it was a very different book for me in general. So, if you haven't gotten it yet, get it now.
Yes, and bookstores anywhere, indie bookstores, online, in person. But kind of diving into your process for this book, what was it like to join the High Republic writing team at the start of Phase 2 here?
I actually didn't know that they were going to add new authors to Phase 2. So when Mike Siglain contacted me and was like, "Have you checked your email?" And I was like, "No, should I?" And got the invitation to join the initiative. It feels very secretive, but it's just fancy language for secrets. And that was an interesting process because the world had already been sort of established. A lot of the work had been done before the new authors joined up, and so I was at first wondering how it was going to work, like what kind of characters I would be allowed to use. Would I be allowed to make up my own characters? And it was a mixture of both things. And so that was a very pleasant surprise. And, the original Fab Five authors, as I call them in my head, they're so welcoming. We have a Slack group where we make sure that we're all on board and just can chat about making sure that all the set pieces are in place. and just to chat and get to know each other a little bit better since we're all working on this together.
I feel like it has become one of the best just like groups of people. Even seeing you guys at New York Comic Con on your panel and just the how the group has grown so much and also the
Mhm.
excitement and energy you all have together. It's just so unique.
We went to Times Square to see the trailer for the High Republic that they put up in right above the Disney store, right on Times Square. It was incredible. And so we were standing there for like 25 minutes waiting for this to come up in like a little huddle. And then we were just chatting. And then boom, it started and we all just got into like our picture positions. Um, and so that was like one of the examples of like, oh, we're all in this like one big group. And so that is pretty cool.
It's so cool to see as well because it feels like writing can often be such a solitary sport, at least to an outsider or a reader's perspective. And I think a project like this really kind of illuminates that it's not always that way. There's a huge community of writers, and this is an example of that community on one side being shown to the reading community as well, which I think is pretty cool. Kind of bridging that gap.
I mean, for yourself too, throughout the pandemic, you've been very busy. Like, I feel like you're publishing a book every month. I'm like, oh my gosh, she's got a new book coming out, and they're all great. Like, there's been so many things you've been doing on the writing side. How did it feel to not only get invited back to write Star Wars, but also for it to come at the right time for you and your professional writing career, like to join such a huge storytelling initiative?
I think that Convergence and the High Republic arrived at a very um, good time in my writing schedule because I do schedule myself out a couple of years in advance, and so the pandemic really threw me. And so some of the books that I had planned um, that were originally supposed to come out in like 2018, 2019, ended up coming out in 2020, 2021. And so it created this backlog in my schedule. And but when it came to Convergence, I was like, I will make time. I will make time. I don't care how many books I'm writing. I'll figure it out. And so it really is that like we're all carving out time so that we can create these stories.
It's hard to say no to Star Wars. It's almost
Yeah.
impossible. And for you too, like coming back after Crash of Fate, I mean, you've probably been waiting to write Star Wars again for quite some time.
hmm Yeah, and A Crush of Fate was a very different experience because uh, it's attached to the theme park, and the thing that they have in common is that they're both unknowns, right? So like nobody knew what Galaxy's Edge was going to look like, and nobody at the beginning knew what um, the High Republic was going to be, and so both of those things ended up being like new fan favorites, right? Like we have a place to go for like Star Wars land, and now we have this other part of the Star Wars universe. So writing coming back for the adult was different in some ways, but similar in all the ones that count, I think.
Was it a bit daunting for you to kind of jump into this initiative now that it had already been established, or did you find that as you mentioned, the authors, the original five authors, had kind of done a lot of the work to set up phase two? Did you find yourself kind of easily slotting into that space?
Oh yeah, I do think so. Because there are sort of like big story beats that we want to hit, and they're all so creative, and there's just so much story tell, and so many characters, and so I never felt like constricted in any way when it came to writing Convergence. I did feel like, and also I've known these guys for like so long. Like Daniel is one of my first uh 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 Daniel and I were both uh, two of the only Latino Latinx writers in young adult fantasy for like up until like a certain year. Like, and so we've known each other for so long, and I consider him like my bro. And so getting to work with him in this has just been really cool. And I've admired Claudia, and we've been friends for so long. So it really is like I've gotten to know some of the other authors, like Kevin and Charles. But everyone else I've we've all been buds.
Yeah, I want to pick up on something you mentioned earlier too, just jumping into phase two. And there's a little bit of crossover with your book, with some of the other things that are coming out or maybe soon to come out. And you mentioned also getting to bring in new characters that maybe you had intentions of doing. Were there any characters that you were really proud of that you had the ability to come up with or craft right from scratch that now readers are going to get to meet now that the book is out?
In Convergence, yeah. So there's Axel Greylark. Um, I had another interview today, and she called him a chaos prince, and I was like, that is an apt description. I think that is correct. So there's Axel, Fantu Zen, and Ziri Albaran. Like, I think that the Ziri and Fantu are the heirs of the two planets, Eiram and E'ronoh. And so I felt like I was just creating set pieces just so that they could either work very well together or crash, or clash, not crash.
Yeah, I feel like Ziri and Fan 2 are such fantastic characters. And the the budding relationship that sort of happens with them throughout the book is sort of the premise of the entire thing, which I found really great. And obviously you're no stranger to romance. Crash of Fate was a romance book, which, like, as soon as we heard you were part of the High Republic, we're like, all right, we know exactly what to expect, and we're so excited about it.
And yeah, that is a compliment, to be clear.
Very much a compliment, yeah.
I mean, I tell people all the time, I'm like, look, if you're coming into a Zoraida book, just know that somebody's going to kiss at some point.
And great, that's what we want.
Yeah, exactly. But now that you've gotten to write two romance-based stories and Star Wars, and there also is a lot of other elements to this, as well as, like, political and mystery, sort of whodunit, which was a lot of fun. While the romance genre is, like, typically noted with a lot of happily ever after, Star Wars romances aren't always afforded that same happy ending. So, like, for you, with the various types of romance we've seen in Star Wars, what elements have you been drawn to as a fan? And then what did you want to incorporate as a creator of new Star Wars romance stories within Convergence?
If this was a true romance, like, which is what I write in under other pen names, it would be an HEA, right? Happily ever after. But because it is Star Wars, I think Star Wars is a very classic type of tragedy. And so the romances, I in A Crash of Fate, I was actually given the option to choose whether it ended happily or whether it ended tragically, like a typical Star War. Uh, and of course, being the optimist and romantic that I am, I chose to have that one end that way. With A Crash of Fate was sorry, with Convergence, it was a little different because love is different than romance sometimes, and I think that love is part of the DNA of Star Wars, right? Like, we would not have Star Wars without Padme and Anakin, right? And so that love story created all of this, right? That is the Skywalker saga. And without love and romance, Star Wars doesn't exist. And some people might not like that answer, but it's there. And it doesn't have to be like gushy all up in your face, but it is this thing that happened, right? It is a thing that drives us. Why are we fighting galactic wars? For peace, for justice, and also what makes us go into battle, what makes us return to a battle. Han Solo, right? Like, what makes us and so I think that those themes are always going to be there, and so they're naturally going to be in the things that I write for Star Wars. Which is not to say all the time, but if it's there, I will pull at those threads. And so I feel like I went off on a tangent, but that's my romance answer.
No, that's all good. I think it's you make a great point about the difference between a romance story and a story with love in it. They aren't necessarily the same thing. They may contain some of the same elements, but they might have different roles to play within the story. So I think that's a really valuable answer, especially within the realm of Star Wars.
And we always think of Matt Stover's Roth's novel where it says, "Love can ignite the stars." And I feel like that is actually such a core part of this book. It's not something that people would think as a solution, love, but ends up being somewhat of a solution to help set the story up. And then, will that solution actually hold throughout the story? So it's such a compelling one to dive into now that we're familiar with it within Star Wars. I guess speaking of like different types of relationships within the book, there's also, Axel and Gela, which if you look at the synopsis of Convergence, there's something going on there as well, because, Axel is, like you said, the ball of chaos, and Gela is a Jedi Knight, at the age of 30. And so seeing some of their dynamic throughout the book was really, really fun. How did that relationship evolve in its earliest inception and throughout like kind of where they end up? And what are some of your inspirations, even within the context of Fantu and Ziri, with the sort of opposites attract sort of thing going on in the story? Like, what inspires that for you?
Man, I think that I looked at with Fantu and Ziri being people who are two very young people in their 20s who are responsible for the future of their entire planets, right? And so I'm looking at how they survived this war, right? Because their planets have been in war for 5 years, and there's this ceasefire, and it holds, but it holds for 3 days, right? And then it all goes to hell in a handbasket. Um, and the answer feels obvious, and yet nobody's willing to do it. So for them, it's like I have to lead. It's the Obi-Wan type of dedication, right? Like somebody who chooses their duty over anything else. But they also get to turn this marriage of like a marriage alliance into something that could be real, right? Like, can this become real? For Fantu, it's real right away. For Ziri, she's more of like, oh, well, maybe. um, but when it came to Gela and Axel, I really love forbidden romance, which is not to say that they have a romance on the page, but there's something there. Um, and because this is semi spoilery, right? I think that Axel challenges Gela in a way that she has never experienced before, because at this period of time, this is the height of the Jedi. This is the Jedi are guardians. They work alone. They don't work they work next to the Republic, and collaborate with them, but they're not. It's not the Clone Wars where they're side by side, and Palpatine's given orders. um, that friction I thought was really interesting to play with, because they're two people that have something to learn for each other. And so with Axel, I went to our boy Kylo, some of that angst, and some of that devil may care attitude that makes characters like Lando and Han really great as well.
When we meet both Axel and Gela, they're individually trying to kind of remain calm and in charge despite their individual complicated situations. What were you hoping to kind of tell readers right off the bat about Axel and Gela through these introductions, and how they navigate like these introductory circumstances kind of going forward in the story?
With their introductions, which I painstakingly wrote that beginning over and over again, until it felt like dominoes tumbling into each other. But with Gela and Axel, you see them in the beginning, and they are rootless, right? Like, even though Axel is the son of one of the chancellors of the Republic, he prefers to be on his ship, run away somewhere, disobey his mother. And Gela travels with the Jedi, but she doesn't technically, the Jedi don't have homes, right? They were they live in the temples, and for some Jedi they might consider the temples homes, but if you're moving around temples, can that ever be your home, right? Can you live in the Force? You can draw strength from the Force, but it's not the same thing as Ziri doing everything possible to protect her land, and Fantu doing everything possible to protect his people, right? Like these are two worlds that have generations and generations of roots. And I feel like I tell that theme in across all my body of work. That theme of rootlessness and searching for belonging and searching for home appears in all of my stories. And I feel like Star Wars is the perfect setting because you have so much of this space immigration, right? Like planets are always in flux, and so people are always moving. There are refugees all over the planets, and even if people don't want to call them that, that's what they are, right? Like people are displaced, whether it's the Empire or whether it's just two planets who can't get along, or Mancala with their civil wars. And so those themes were really, really interesting. And so Gela and Axel, both in different ways, they're very similar, but they're also very different. And I think that's why they are drawn to each other. And even if Gela won't fully admit while Axel is like, well, this is how I feel. I have too many feelings now.
I gotta say, every time Axel enters a room in this book, I was just laughing hysterical. I'm just like sitting on my sofa, like laughing. I'm like, I could just see him with his smug smile, like just
Yeah.
saying these things. He's such an interesting character. And I think at the time we're recording now, one day ago on IGN, they released I think it's the first excerpt from the book, which features
The first
Axel.
of his, yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And so that was really fun to have that out in the world, people to see, because we really see him in such a lowly place. He's kind of dealing with his wretched self that he wants to embrace. And I think it is interesting talking about home, how he's trying to run away from he has all of these things, these resources, this privilege, and he wants nothing to do with it. Whereas Gela is like, I don't know what my home is. I don't know where I come from or who my family is, like what's out there. He's running away from something that maybe she secretly deep down would like to have. I think
Yeah.
that makes it really interesting.
It's a good dynamic, tried and true. This book kind of shifting to like the other piece of the story. This book, kind of much like Light of the Jedi, opens with our characters in a time of chaos. It's very alarming to start the High Republic basis. You're like, wow, this character seems so interesting, and they're dead, so what did your world, it's true, it was alarming. I fell in love with the captain on whatever, I can't even think of the ship name in this moment. In Light of the Jedi, she died by the end of chapter 1. It was brutal.
Yeah, that was.
And I'm not going to spoil anything for the people, but like, don't get too attached in those early chapters, my friends. But what would your world building process look like as you crafted the action? And this conflict between Eiram and E'ronoh, and what was most important for setting the stage for, this seismic event that has ripples throughout parts of the galaxy.
Well, when I pitched my concept for Convergence, I actually used Man from Uncle, but like the element of Man from Uncle where it's like the two spies who hate each other having to work together and then become like BFFs. Um, and so I start with that. I start with like an umbrella concept of like this is the overarching story that I want to tell. And then I look at the set pieces, I look at the characters. This story was a little difficult because it's so expansive, and we have two planets. Not only two planets, we have two planets. We have the Republic and the Jedi, and so my work is now to like tell you the state of the galaxy, um, and also build these relationships. And so for me, the entry point was it has to be a moment where everything is quiet. And so the the ceasefire that opens the chapter just made the most sense to me, because we're understanding what's at stake. We're understanding why Ziri, they're desperate to get this ice shipment because they don't have any water. Aram is waiting for another shipment, and you have like a corridor of just debris, which is like a physical proof of the last 5 years of their fighting, right? So like they have to face it every single time they go into atmosphere. Um, um, and so there's no escaping that. And so the world building really started off with like, what are they fighting for? How do they stop? And who's going to try to get them to keep fighting, right? Who's going to break this peace? Everything else, like the planets and the rituals and like the fantasy world building of it, like the food that they eat, like in Aram, people eat like a type of seaweed, and they've eaten it for so many generations that they have like green freckles, the way that like flamingos eat. Is it kelp or algae or something that they eat that makes them pink, right? Otherwise, they would have white feathers. And so, like things like that, like I started thinking about, like what physical traits can change a person after living somewhere for so many generations. Um, and so that all of that world building was just like the icing, but the big stuff is like what is at stake, and how are we gonna fix it?
I have to say the world building in this was some of the most impressive that I've seen in the High Republic, because you're not only tackling one but two places, and
That
we
was
get to
hard.
spend a lot of we get to spend a lot of time in those places, journeying throughout various parts of those planets. And I gotta say, like Aram gave me some big Arrakis or E'ronoh, actually. E'ronoh gave me some big
E'ronoh,
Arrakis
yeah.
vibes from
Yeah.
Dune. I was given some
You're the
I was like,
second
"Where's the
person. You're the second
sandworms?"
person. You're the second person to say that to me. And it's funny because like I think I sort of imagined it more like the Southwest, like because they have like the stone structures, like stone arches. And so like I thought more Southwest, but I could definitely see something like Arrakis. It's just less a little less sand.
Yeah, yeah,
Valid.
but
but
but there's a lot of dust, right? There's a lot of dust, uh uh um because it's everywhere, like it's everywhere, it's like in people's faces, it's like it, and that's why, and that affects like they can't have the same shields, electrostatic shields that Aram has, right? Because like the dust is so fine, it'll just, they'll always be repairing them. So it's like things like that I spent so much time thinking about, like, and that's like the fun part of world building for me.
one other thing too with the planets was not only the like cultural aspect, but the societal, political side of things, where there's definitely a class division that's happening, and there's also these like very prominent themes of generational like trauma, generational war that are at stake, and the idea of like we inherited this war and like we're going to be the ones that have to deal with it, which feels very parallel to our world and like the things that now we have to carry on from a previous generation and figure out and solve for the future. Like where did you draw inspiration from that when looking at that aspect of these planets?
That one's a little harder because I think that I was writing this book during the height of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, right? And so I felt like I could not watch the news because I didn't want any of that to like bleed into my book. Um, but just from having taken a history class, right? Like we know the consequences of war, and we understand, just even in our own country, like what civil wars look like. And I think that I'm from Ecuador, and so Ecuador has had its share of wars with bordering, the we share a border with many countries, but specifically with Peru. And so I did think about like stories that my dad or my uncles would tell, from their grandfathers, right? And so like they carry these stories, and they carry these like this anger that is like that they don't, it might be misplaced, right? Like how do you get over something that happened to your grandparents when they're telling it to you? And so I felt like that was specifically the challenge for the people of Eiram and E'ronoh, because it's ever present, right? Like they are, when they look up at the sky, they see the shadow of this planet right uh, in their atmosphere. So they can't escape at all. And so yeah, so it became a matter of like who's going to bring forth the peace. And it's Star Wars, right? It's in the title.
If it was Star Piece, it'd be an entirely different
I
adventure.
know.
Lots of HEAs, everybody's thrilled, happy, but it's not that sort of story. Um, we talked a little bit about the big kind of team nature of the High Republic and collaborating with the other authors, as well as kind of the work you're doing to world build. In the acknowledgments of the book, you thank, quote, literary Jedi Master Del Rey, I guess now Random House Worlds senior editor Tom Holler. With a project as kind of grand as the High Republic, what role does the editor and the publishing team play in your writing process, and as you kind of craft the story and focus it in?
So for Star Wars, it's always twofold, right? You get notes from story group and you get notes from editorial. And I think that all of that, story group and Lucasfilm in general, which includes like the High Republic team, um, and and everyone who gets to read who gets to read the book. So you have the publisher and then you have Lucasfilm, right? And so you really get like there's so many chefs in this kitchen, um, and so it can be a little overwhelming. But I I've been doing this for over 10 years. So like, for me it's like you take it a chapter at a time. With A Crash of Fate, I had three teams, right? So I had Disney Press, Lucasfilm, Story Group, um, and then Imagineering, because the parks also had to keep their own story continuity. Um, and so so I think that like having had more chefs in the kitchen for that almost made this a little bit easier, um, because it was almost less people.
Yeah, I feel like the team really has hit their stride as well, and there's like a very clear vision of what the High Republic wants to be and the story that it's telling, and I think that is really that cohesion is really seen on the page. It comes
Good.
through. And like speaking of the writing process, what did you feel were some of the most challenging aspects of Convergence, but also coming out of it, looking back, what were the most rewarding ones that you walk away from feeling very proud of? Whether it's a challenge that you overcame or something that you got to contribute to a galaxy far, far away that previously you didn't.
I think my challenge is because I've written adult fiction before, but I've never written like space adult fiction. But um, to me, Star Wars is fantasy, right? Space opera. But the challenge was originally I wanted to keep only 4 points of view, but that became almost impossible because we needed to know other things that were happening in the world. Um, so it there are only so many times a character can eavesdrop, right, on somebody else's situation. I think I have one eavesdropping scene, but that tool gets old very quickly. So after a certain point, like we need to have that person's point of view, and so it just I think it made it better with those. It's sort of like switching the camera, right? Like because in a movie you could just click over and show like um a really quick scene of somebody doing something, but in a book you have to completely set it. And so um I do very, very close third person, um and I maybe it's just the way like the way that I prefer to write, but I think that because I get so close into the character's head, um I need to I need to understand who they are, what they want, their emotion. And so that it wasn't a challenge as much as it was like time consuming. And when you're working on something like IP, time time is a luxury.
Definitely.
Yeah. Speaking of points of view, there was one right in the beginning that is of a character we don't see too much of throughout the book, but it ruined me. So I don't appreciate that, but I also do because it was really touching, but also tragically touching.
Was it the pilot?
Maybe so. I got a little teary. I got a little teary eyed.
That's what I'm talking about.
Thank
It's a little.
you.
I was like, don't get attached. You'll be sad.
It was powerful though. Like even just getting perspectives
you.
from smaller characters. That's what I appreciated the most about this book. Like just characters who are kind of on the periphery.
Do you know why I'm like this? I think it's because one of my favorite directors is Alfonso Cuarón, and he tells stories like that. Like he goes off like into these. If you watch Ito Me Va También, for Diego Luna, of course, and Gael. Oh my god, I love that movie so much. But like he goes off into these like it's third person, and he's telling the story of these guys, and then he'll like then tell you a little bit more about some random character. And I feel like that storytelling can be very powerful because a novel is not just like the 3 stars or the 4 stars of the book. It's like every single person on this ship has to have a purpose. Everyone has their own story, and they're all like sort of like in this like horrible gridlock traffic, just like trying to get through. And that's maybe I'm the chaos one, right? Like, that's just my writing process. But I appreciate that because I really love that scene. I think I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, it hurts. It's great. I agree. Kind of beginning to wrap up here. For readers who are maybe continuing their High Republic journey from phase 1, or readers who are just starting their High Republic journey with phase 2, what do you hope readers take away from the Convergence and from phase 2?
I hope that readers take away the excitement of a new part of the initiative, a new corner of the galaxy. It feels more like the Wild West. Just because we're further into the past. There's the possibility of looking at the Jedi in a way where we get to understand sort of their purpose, and not just their purpose, but their mission, and how every single one of them rises to the top, and rises to the challenge to like protect this galaxy. And so it really is, there's so much good stuff in store. If you love chaos, please read my book. There are some, I can't not write like hilarious moments. I think I'm funnier than I am, baby. But like, I feel like my books always have humor, a little bit of romance, and some action. So if you like those 3 things, come on board.
The humor is on point. Every time Axel Greylock again walks into a room, I go, God damn it, this guy, come on.
this motherfucker.
One of my new favorite characters.
Literally how I felt. That's literally how I felt. And Lydia Kang and I, because Lydia's book is the companion to my book, Cataclysm. And so you already see on the cover, right? Like Axel is holding Gella's lightsaber for reasons. And so she has so many cool things in store. We've been texting for the last several months, like while I'm writing, while she's writing. And so it's been a good time.
Yeah, quick shout out to both covers. I love how if you put them back to back, they really mirror each other. Like, what was your reaction when you first saw those 2 covers?
Oh my God. When I saw Axel holding, because I can't say it, but when I saw Axel holding Gella's lightsaber on the cover, I didn't even know they were going to do that. I was like, oh my God, they did it. This is great. So I was just completely blown away. And I love the fan art, and not the fan art, the concept art that we have for him. I hope we can get some more concept art for the others too.
I'm right there with you. I'm such a fan of any art we can get of characters, and I think that the art that we've gotten so far for these characters has been great. So I love it. Kind of heading into our rapid fire here, just to close.
Okay.
Yeah. There's no wrong answers, and it's all good.
Those are the ones I didn't look at, so because I wanted them to be fresh.
Yeah, no trivia. But what current or upcoming Star Wars story excites you the most, and what are you loving in Star Wars right now?
Oh my goodness, I'm loving Andor. I think it's such a cool storytelling. Diego Luna still looks like a fresh baby face that he's always looked his entire life, so it just makes Andor really great. But it like the way that Andor just tackles the darkness of that time period is just really, it's so intense, and it does have these like beautiful funny moments. Love humor. I also love Path of Deceit. Yes, Path of Deceit by Tessa Gratton and Justina Ireland, which is a YA romance in a way. And it is a very typical YA romance for reasons. And I just love what they did. It just like they talk about the Force in such a beautiful way. And like Tessa was born to talk about the Force, you know what I mean? And so like I was really loving those two things. I picked up some of the comic books. I've always loved the comics. Like they're sort of like my comfort reads. And I'm gonna just rewatch all the movies, which I do every like Christmas time. Like I'll just rewatch in order. So that's what I'm loving.
I love that. Yeah, Diego Luna is a baby. I gotta say the no beard look is definitely growing on me too. He's great. I love him. Do you have a favorite Phase 1 character or somebody that when you read the High Republic books or caught up on them whenever you did, you were just like
Elzar Mann.
Okay,
yes,
great.
Agree. Great.
I know Sarah said no wrong answers, but that's actually the correct answer. So
that is the correct answer. I'm like,
10 out of 10.
I remember you tweeted once because I hadn't read the books yet when you tweeted this, and you said Elzar Mann Fox, and I was like, great, I'm gonna make time because I was reading other research stuff, and I was like, okay, Brad said this, I'm gonna let me go in.
Oh man, that's a compliment if I've ever heard one. I'm so happy that tweet got you to invest yourself in Elzar Mann. See, Sarah always makes fun of me for mentioning his pants being off in the middle of a battle. I'm like, this dude's a mess. He's a hot mess.
He's such a mess. I love him so much.
Yeah, chaos man. Mm-hmm. Love him. He's
kind of a blueprint for Axel.
He is. He's the Chaos King, and Axel is the Chaos Prince.
Star Wars is so good. No further comment necessary. I love this. I'm going to pivot the mood entirely. Kind of on a final question, we kind of always ask this. What does Star Wars mean to you today?
Today, I think Star Wars means the same thing today that it meant to me. Actually, no. I'm gonna change that, because when I first started consuming Star Wars things, it's been omnipresent. It's always been there. It's something that my brother and I watched after school, before school. He used to act out the Luke Skywalker on the barge, free us or die, and he used to pretend I was Jabba, of course, because he was 6. And so like Star Wars is family, and Star Wars is family. Star Wars is love, and now for me, I actually never imagined that I would be part of the Star Wars initiative. And it's, not looking for compliments. It's just like, it just wasn't ever something that I thought that would happen. Cause I just didn't know how it worked. It was always so mysterious. And so now that I can see like the behind the curtain, I'm like, oh, it's just a bunch of people who really love this thing and want to make it better and want to add to it, want to make it bigger. And so it's all of that. It's like the beginning of it, only more, right? Like if bigger vibes, more intense, like you intensify that first feeling of like Star Wars being family and Star Wars being all over. And so it's hard to like separate yourself from like being a fan and wanting to get everything correct and wanting to have and like having this pressure of like, oh my God, I I just hope that the fans like it and that people feel seen, and that you do justice to characters that people are going to love, and that's it. And hopefully, make people cry, because writers live on tears.
That's true, Cabin.
And yeah, this is the second interview where like that is the shout out. It's like murder in Star Wars. Somebody called him the
Although
butcher
Justina
of
and
Star Wars,
Tessa too, like, now at this point, I don't know. They're on the list. They're on the list.
They're coming for his crown. It's fine.
Yeah, but I gotta say, even though you could never have imagined being a part of this, and now you are here, and Star Wars Publishing is much better place for it. So we appreciate your voice as part of the Star Wars Publishing family. Convergence is fantastic. For anybody listening who hasn't read Crash of Fate, also read that as well. Could not highly recommend it enough. So thank you, Zoraida, for coming on the show today. We're so happy to have you back. For our folks
thank you so much.
Want to follow you online, where can they find you? And what of your many books are coming out soon?
On Twitter, I am Z like in Zorro, the phrase Z like in Zorro. And on Instagram, I'm Zoraida Solo. On Spotify, I am also Zoraida Solo, and I have a THR Convergence playlist, which is what I listen to, because I gave all of my characters theme songs, and surprised to know one Axel's theme song is "Don't Stop Me Now" by Queen. My next book, I'm working on a Disney IP called Kiss the Girl, which is a contemporary retelling of The Little Mermaid. It's part of a series of called Meant to Be. And mine is the third book, and they're all standalones. But in my version, Ariel is a pop princess who runs away with an indie rock band to find her voice. And so obviously in disguise, I guess it's like adult Hannah Montana. But
I love that.
But so that's my next book. I'm currently working on the next thing and the next thing. And so one day I'll take a break, but it is not this day.
Valid. I have been loving the Meant to Be series, so I'm very much looking forward to your installment.
That is, if you look at, you can see my corkboard. That's all the beats, all the plot beats that I was editing. I finished this morning.
Spoilers.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you've been busy. We hope you continue to write Star Wars 2 in the future. We hope you're back. So thank you again for your contributions for this galaxy far, far away. Thank you for joining us, and may the Force be with you.
May the Force be with you.
Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for listening to our interview with Zoraida Córdova. Once again, Convergence is out on bookshelves right now, today. So go check it out. The High Republic Phase 2 has been great so far, and we are so lucky to have Zoraida's voice as part of that as well. So, and thank you to Zoraida for joining us, and thank you to Del Rey as well for sending us review copies.
Yes, and please look forward to our upcoming full discussion on Convergence. It will be on the podcast feeds relatively soon, so be on the lookout for that. Get to reading! !
And while you're waiting, go check out Sarah and I on Twitter, Letterboxd, and Goodreads, and follow the podcast on Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and Hive. Wherever you listen to the podcast as well, make sure you're subscribed to the show so that Convergence episode drops into your feed when we dive deep into that book. And leave us a rating if you'd be so kind. Helps other folks find the show and join the discussion, especially those fellow High Republic fans in the Star Wars community. We love more of them here.
Yes, and we also have a Patreon where tiers start at just $1, and we are really grateful to all of our patrons who help make the show happen. So thank you to Amy, Brian with an I, Brian with a Y, Cheryl, Clay, Danny, Davis, Dylan, Huang, Jen, Knights of Ren, Leanne, Levi, Lucy, Lindsay, Rob, Santa, Saber Bouquet, Sky Talker, Steven, Travis, and Tom. Thank you all very much for your support, and thanks to everyone for listening to this interview. Hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you all once again. Happy holidays, and until next time, may the Force be with you always.
Bye.